If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK, New Year's edition. So now we are here at the end of a very interesting year, 2021, and we're going to go over the New Year's Day conspiracy, calendar conspiracies going pretty far back in time, what it means for the present day, and also recapping this year. What is the scoreboard? Conspiracy theorists versus coincidence theorists. What the scoreboard looks like at the end of this year, at the end of last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I am, of course, your host, Bruce McGuire, and I'm here with
Sid Irwin.
the Mensa-minded, possibly Prometheus Society-minded Sid Irwin, and we will be dissecting all of these things. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. Like and share this podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. Could also be a guest in the podcast, depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, Sid. So first of all, did you have a good holiday?
Thought I did. Thank you, Ruth, for asking. How about yourself?
You know me, workaholic, man, workaholic. So,
Respect.
how was your year?
Interesting. I suppose the best way to put it.
That it was. Any memorable moments? What about the events that transpired this year? Do you think any authority-worshipping cultists who have blind faith in the corrupt on the idiot box had their eyes opened by all of these that come up in higher frequencies? The more people are do you think that opened anybody's eyes this year?
I mean, I did think that was a rather interesting scenario, but who knows? After all, I mean, I believe wasn't just another more aggressively contagious version of a different strain from earlier. I mean, it's just constant change.
Just another different type of.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, who knows? Again, this is MINDSHOCK, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. But those licking the boots of authorities never seem to learn their lesson, do they? Stockholm Syndrome is the real pandemic, in my opinion.
I could see that.
I mean, do the masses never learn? I mean, if you look at the slippery slope that happened in Australia, so they got and then it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. What are they on there, like 17th? And they had mass. Everybody's wearing masks, and their numbers seem to be a lot worse than like somewhere like Florida where people just don't give a crap.
That is a very sad and interesting conundrum to occur that way.
Yeah, it's almost like certain diseases are going to do whatever they're going to do, and the pesky humans and their hubris, the more they try to fight it, the worse it gets. Is that a weird type of fate? The fates laughing at the goofiness of humans.
You could put it that way.
Or I could put it another way: whatever you resist persists.
It's catching. Let's do that trend.
Yeah, I mean, and then you got the Amish, like they don't have idiot boxes, so they're just living as normal this whole time. So, and seemingly unaffected. So that's quite curious, very, very curious. So that's one aspect of 2021, one of the most talked about aspects. I mean, what else really happened? I mean, people tried to get back to work. A lot of people don't want to work. And then, of course, we have the Great Resignation, as it's being called, where people kind of are no longer willing to work their corporate slave jobs. And more people are striking out on their own. Some would theorize that society would be much better off if that had always been the case, because then if people are doing what they believe their purpose really is, then they would be more happier in general, which would lead to a more productive and pleasant society in the first place.
That's a very distinct possibility.
And if we trace that back to the public indoctrination system, aka the educational system, many also postulate that trying to put one size fits all solution and trying to ram certain information, propaganda rather, in every single child's head, the same propaganda, the same type of way, on the same type of schedule, is beyond dumb. Because, I mean, if you really take a step back and think about it, every individual is so unique. Not only are their interests unique, but the way they learn are unique. Audio, visual, like there's just so many different types of ways people learn, and not to mention that everybody develops at a different rate. That has nothing to do with being, a super genius or not. People simply develop at different rates mentally as they do physically. You have certain athletes that are just, certain kids when they're younger, they're already really big, strong, and fast. Other kids might not even peak until late college. So how dumb is it to have the same curriculum and the same schedule for every single child? It really doesn't make any sense once you take a step back and look at it objectively.
If you put it that fashion, then yeah, the simple weirdness is to have the same expectation for every single person.
I mean, I'm not even necessarily saying that's a bad thing if you do have some kind of uniform curriculum, but it's kind of dumb to do it at the same exact rate. That's what doesn't quite make sense, because then you have super geniuses that are made to feel stupid simply because they learn in a different way, or they develop at a different rate. So they might end up being much smarter than their so-called peers at an earlier age. Everybody kind of understands this in terms of sports and physical development, but for whatever reason, it's not really talked about mentally.
Which is very true.
And the human brain doesn't even finish forming until mid-20s ish. So, that's kind of like, it's really weird. Nobody really talks about it, and that's without even considering that everybody is so unique personality-wise, every single way mentally. What they should be doing with their life and their contributions to society would be so much greater if they were allowed to focus and prioritize those interests instead of having this homogenous one size fits all curriculum. I mean, the amount of genius that has been robbed from this world by government schooling is just so astronomical, it's unfathomable, mind shocking, if you will.
Which is sad if you look at it from that perspective, undoubtedly.
Well, if you look at all the greatest geniuses who made all the greatest impacts, they dropped out of school.
Forged on the path, indeed.
Because if they were forced to finish school, they might have just been completely indoctrinated goofs, because they wouldn't have been able to break that conditioning early enough to develop their talents and geniuses. So that was a little bit of a tangent. That's not really what we're talking about. But since society does seem to be crumbling rather quickly, would you agree with that? Is that what we've been seeing in the past year or two?
I believe so. Maybe not in a sense, maybe fully crumbling, but rather changing. Maybe in certain ways evolving.
Some people would actually say crumbling, though. If you look at the parallels between the United States and the Roman Empire, the fall obviously doesn't happen overnight, but there are so many similarities and parallels. It's quite eerie.
Well, it is how it goes. I mean, that's just been spoken, empires rise and fall. But I mean, in truth, that's just how change is. Usually at some point, something's getting destroyed, broken down, then reshaped and remolded into something else.
So, okay, so quick recap of the year. How would you say, would you call 2021 a win for the US or even the human race as a whole? Or would you call it a big fat L?
I mean, if I took it in the simplest fashion, depending on which perspective you like and how you value life, I mean, it's clearly a win. I mean, it still exists. So that's always a great thing. Again, if you believe in that perspective. But if, I guess, a sense for society, I guess, moving forward, progressing more, I guess, resolving issues and taking a next step forward, then yeah, I suppose you could say it's an L.
I'm gonna take a highly controversial position on this one. Are you ready for this? This is going to be the Bruce McGuire theory of what is going on. Instead of falling for the middle ground logical fallacy and saying life's not black and white, the truth is in the middle. That's, of course, the middle ground logical fallacy, because the truth is whatever it is. It's not in the middle. It's whatever it is. So if it happens to be on an either extreme, that's what it is. So I'm going to say this happened. I'm going to say both extremes increased this past year. So I'm going to say it was both a giant win and a giant loss. Because on one hand, just the silly antics of all of these goofs that just put blind faith in the corrupt and just are willing to do whatever the corrupt say at the drop of a hat, like circus animals. I mean, that's really sad to see. And it seems like most people they're on such short strings of their ego that they do not want to admit they've been hoodwinked. As Mark Twain once said, it's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled. Which also, I mean, that might be, if we had to pick a motto for 2021, I might have to pick that one. Just to see the way all these people doubled down on the BS. So the BS got called early on, and then they just kept doubling down, and it's almost like we're living in a satire type reality now, where there's just the shark has been jumped not once, not twice, not thrice, but quadrice or more, possibly quintice. What do you have to say about that?
I would like to hear the elaboration.
Well, if you just look at what's going on in the world, the ability for the average individual to discern truth has seemed to have completely fallen by the wayside. On one hand, that is one extreme. Now, on the other extreme, which I believe is also true, is that people, because of all of this shark jumping, for the people that were kind of more on the fence, now they can see the extent that government corruption seeks to dominate all of the peons they call the citizens of their countries. And, it's like you give them what's that old saying? You give them a finger, they take an arm or something like that.
Give them an inch and they'll take a mile.
Well, isn't there another one with the arm?
There might be, very well.
I remember something vaguely about the arm, but anyway, so they were, whatever happened in 2 weeks to flatten the curve? You remember that one? I mean, all you can do is laugh out loud at the people that bought that. And here's the thing. The people that actually did buy that, I'm not even going to call them dumb, because that on the surface, that seems semi-reasonable, just based on the way diseases work and but how quickly that escalated to okay, they're never going to children, they're never going to mandate. Now we're so far down the conspiracy theorist prediction. I mean, they're batting 1,000. Meanwhile, the coincidence theorists, I mean, they've been wrong every step of the way. But at a certain point, when you have somebody, like you have these corrupt profiteers on the idiot box, like Mr. Nobody wants to talk. Does nobody talk about the fact that he killed like unknown millions by promoting all those that killed more people than AIDS?
Wow.
And now he's doing the same playbook. Nobody really notices. Nobody wants to talk about it. But if he's wrong every step of the way, why would you continue to trust him? I'm not following that logic there. Like, why would you trust the people that are always wrong every step of the way?
That's a fair question to ask. I'm not entirely sure how to answer it, considering, but I'm gonna take a stab in the dark at possibility, just because, like you said, some of them are like sheep and they just follow. If that's the person that's been put in power, then they're just, again, doubling down more and more.
Well, that's why I said it's like a satire society, because from 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I mean, yeah, I guess you could hoodwink people into a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, but how many years? How many mandates? How many new that appear to not be dissuaded by any and only increase in frequency based on all available metrics in all available countries that keeps those metrics? So you have all this information, like where the so-called establishment narratives are proven wrong to unimaginable exponential amounts. And Stockholm syndrome is so prevalent that people just continue following. Like, I think 10, 20 years ago, I think you probably could convince the masses to go 2 weeks to flatten the curve. But I think the jig would, just my opinion, of course, I think the jig would have been up probably at around the 6-month mark. And when mandates were just beginning to be, actually not even probably the mandates. When they were beginning to become mandated, I think the masses would have called the jig up when things didn't change after about a month after that. What do you think?
Um, honestly, I'm not sure what to say to that entirely. Or, I mean, after all, I still worked within obviously societal settings, and I work at a hospital. So they're obviously going to instill all of these sorts of mandates, mainly due to the fact that again, it's like do it or no longer work here. And then there's the brave few or the scared few, or just those who are again just fed up with all the BS that could just walk away, while there's others who getting terrified too, because again they're not sure where their income's going to come from, and they need that. So
Yeah, well, I'm talking about honesty, though. Like, I'm talking about, like, let's say this happened 20, 30 years ago. I'm not necessarily saying that people wouldn't have complied to keep their jobs, but I think they would have been honest about it. I think they would have said, okay, these guys have always been wrong, but I need to keep my job. What am I going to do? I don't think there would have been this mass societal insistence that it's all working when everything gets worse and worse. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Where, like, it's obvious everything the talking heads on the idiot box said has been wrong every step of the way. So at which point do you stop the hallucinated justification of it and just say, okay, these people don't know what they're talking about?
honestly, at least from the way the trend goes, I'm not even scared of it in the sense where if I look at even books that I've listened to talking about like I guess a similar world ending or world changing scenarios, it's just I fear it might just progress to the point until it's too late. When people get desperate enough, they're like, "Yo, this is really truly not working." But it's like, well, yes, it's not working, but it might be too late to do anything to change the path you're on.
Well, it's never too late. I mean, like, so here's the thing, though. What's the average turnaround time on failed medications? Because it usually takes years for all the lawsuits to get settled. I'm not going to name any specific companies, but I don't think people would be surprised to find out that certain manufacturers have really long rap sheets and billions of dollars in fines. Obviously, this has all been FOIA'd. There's no reason to trust anybody on any side. You can look up the court documents for yourself. So, is it really that surprising? I mean, if, let's say, for the sake of argument, if theoretically, again, I'm not saying don't work, hint, hint, YouTube, obviously all the work perfectly and they're 100% safe. I mean, everybody knows that. So, but would it, if they didn't, obviously never in history would it be admitted within a day. I mean, it would take years and years in lawsuits because there's trillions of dollars of profit on the line, but only billions of dollars of fines. So if you're making hundreds a day and you're fined tens a day, you're obviously going to have no problem paying 20 or 30 bucks on fines and continue to operate while you're raking in hundreds. So I don't know why that's difficult for some people to understand, but that's kind of what I meant in terms of both extremes. So the other extreme is, of course, I think a lot of this nonsense woke people up. Because if they're triple and triple and they're still being hospitalized, they maybe they might think, wait a second, is it possible this doesn't work? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not them. But I think both extremes have increased. And that's why we're kind of getting the mess that we're getting. It's like they're really, I don't know, do you really think there's a lot of people left in the middle ground there?
I mean, I think so, more than likely, probably. I mean, I might have to put myself in the middle ground even because, funny enough, I had recently contracted and declared positive about a week ago. So I had recovered relatively quickly from it. So,
Well,
some might.
so okay, we didn't mention this, but in this whole hoopla, I think people should look again. Don't trust what anybody says. Go on the FDA's website and look at how they revoked and recalled all of these tests. Again, this is the FDA doing this. These are not the crazy conspiracy theorists. This is the FDA recalling all of these tests because of all the false positives, false negatives, because obviously it cannot be accurately used to detect viruses. That's not what the technology is for. So,
Sure.
with all of the being inaccurate, nobody can really say who's positive or what does the positive or negative mean. It doesn't mean anything in any direction because the tests aren't accurate. So this large scale failure, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like this large scale failure on in every single category. I mean, that's this. I don't know. Has this ever happened in history before where you literally cannot prove anything about anything because of all of the faulty technology, whether you're talking or tests or predictions or downs. Again, you can look at the Australia statistics with all their extensive downs, and then you could look at other countries with no downs. So you can look at all this data, and if only one thing is clear, is that really nobody knows what they're talking about. That's really the takeaway, in my opinion, from 2021. Uh, why would you continue to trust people who don't know what they're talking about? How much are worth that aren't accurate? How much are worth that don't prevent contraction of diseases?
I mean, I get what you're saying. I do. And I can't lie. That's why the if you put it this way, from if you hear any of the promotions now, I mean they're going more so from saying this will prevent blah 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 from happening, but add some more so it'll just help ease the symptoms. So again, switching the script. But I mean, in truth, if I had to think about history wise, I'm pretty sure it has happened. Probably plenty enough times. I think one that comes to mind is really like, let's say, the Salem witch hunts. I mean, they said, these people do this. This is some witchcraft witchery. Here's the test to prove that this person is a witch, which is a test that literally has no validation
Wow.
whatsoever. That can't be, so it's like, without history, it's happened plenty of times.
Okay, no. I meant in recent history, but you make a very good point. You make a very good point because this is actually, yeah, if you really think about it, there's a strong parallel to the Salem witch trials because you have all this blind faith and authority when they're basically just using random tests that are just whatever, malarkey, for lack of a better word. And can anybody prove that they really aren't witches, though? It's not that they proved that they were witches.
Yeah.
But in their minds, they still thought theoretically they could be, because a lot of those people most likely believed in things like witches and witchcraft at that time. So
Exactly.
if they truly believed in witches and witchcraft, then in their minds, it was a very real possibility that the person could theoretically be a witch, even if the test wasn't accurate. That's actually a really good parallel, Sid Irwin.
I'm just saying, because I don't know tell me if I'm wrong, but in that kind of sense, really, which again, a driving force that helps allow these things to happen is going to be fear. And if you can get the masses scared and you say, well, here's this snake oil, here's this cure, they might just eat it up.
All right, so let's get into the New Year's conspiracy. So I'm just going to introduce this with the old phantom time hypothesis just to set the stage here. So this is just right off the wiki for the overview. The phantom time hypothesis is a historical conspiracy theory asserted by Heribert Illig. First published in 1991, it hypothesizes a conspiracy by the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII to fabricate the Anno Domini dating system retroactively in order to place them at the special year of AD 1000 and to rewrite history, to legitimize Otto's claim to the Holy Roman Empire. Illig believed that this was achieved through the alteration, misrepresentation, and forgery of documentary and physical evidence. According to this scenario, the entire Carolingian period, including the figure of Charlemagne, is a fabrication. With a phantom time of 297 years, AD 614 to 911 for the conspiracy theorists there, and also this theory was introduced in 1991. added to the early Middle Ages. The hypothesis has never attracted any support from historians. And that's an interesting propagandized line there. Any mainstream historians, obviously. Any establishment historians whose paycheck depend on them remaining loyal to the establishment did not consider this theory, of course. So Herbert Illig was born in 47 in Wachenstraub, Bavaria. He was active in association dedicated to Immanuel Velikovsky, catastrophism, and historical revisionism. The Gesellschaftel zur Rekonstruktion der Menschheits- und Naturgeschichtsgeschichte, English, Society for the Reconstruction of Human and Natural History. From 89 to 94, he acted as editor of the journal Past, Early, Present. Since 95, he has worked as a publisher and author under his own publishing company, Mantis Verlag, and publishing his own journal, Leaps in Time. Outside of his publications related to revised chronology, he has edited the works of Egon Friedel. Okay, so before focusing on the early Middle Ages period, Illig published several proposals for revised chronologies of prehistory and of ancient Egypt. His proposals received prominent coverage in German popular media in the 90s. His 96 Invented Middle Ages also received scholarly recensions, but was universally rejected as fundamentally flawed by historians. Anything that threatens the official narrative is, of course, rejected. In 97, the journal Ethics and Social Sciences offered a platform for critical discussion to Illig's proposal, with a number of historians commenting on its various aspects. After 1997, there has been little scholarly reception of Illig's ideas, although they continue to be discussed as pseudo-history in German popular media. Illig continued to publish the phantom time hypothesis until at least 2013. Also in 2013, he published an unrelated topic of art history on German Renaissance master Anton Pilgram, but again proposing revisions to conventional chronology and arguing for the abolition of the art historical category of mannerism. So this is his proposal based on his hypothesis. The scarcity of archaeological evidence that can be reliably dated to AD 614 to 911, the perceived inadequacies of radiometric and dendrochronological methods of dating this period, and the over-reliance of medieval historians on written sources. I mean, those are all great points, though, because obviously fallible human technology is fallible. There's a lot of people that don't understand that, but humans create this technology, these various different technologies, in order to attempt to determine how old something is. They're obviously flawed. Now, to the extent that they're flawed is open to debate, but I don't know. A lot of people just put blind religious faith in fallible human technology. What do you think about that?
It has happened plenty of times. So
I mean, the easiest one to look at is DNA testing, because over the past 50 years, the amount of progress in DNA testing, like each new leap in DNA testing technology shows how inaccurate the previous generation was. And you have even people that got locked up in prison based on DNA matches being exonerated because they weren't really matches. And nobody really wants to talk about that, but I mention that all the time on MINDSHOCK True Crime. So, okay, continuing on here. The presence of Romanesque architecture in 10th century Western Europe, suggesting the Roman era was not as long ago as conventionally thought. And of course, those familiar with Anatoly Fomenko and the new chronology, all of the rewriting of history, so to speak, we go over that on the Altered History series, which of course Sid Irwin has been on those podcasts as well. There's definitely a lot of funny business going on in the matter of recording history. The relationship between the Julian calendar, Gregorian calendar, and the underlying astronomical solar or tropical year. The Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar, was long known to introduce a discrepancy from the tropical year of around 1 day for each century that the calendar was in use. By the time the Gregorian calendar was introduced in AD 1582, Illig alleges that the old Julian calendar should have produced a discrepancy of 13 days between it and the real or tropical calendar. Instead, the astronomers and mathematicians working for Pope Gregory VIII had found that the civil calendar needed to be adjusted only by 10 days. The Julian calendar day, Thursday, October 4th, 1582, was followed by the first day of the Gregorian calendar, Friday, October 15th, 1582. From this, Illig concludes that the AD era had counted roughly 3 centuries, which never existed. So let's put aside his 3 centuries theory. Let's disregard that for a moment. How much trust would you put in a mathematician working for the Pope? I mean, what do you think, Sid? Like, why do people put all this religious blind faith in these authorities that were literally religious based on blind faith in the church?
I mean, that's how they've been raised. That's how they've been taught. That's how they've been, I guess, in a sense, indoctrinated.
But hold on a second. No, I'm talking about like right now, today. Let's say you're a PhD historian from a prestigious Ivy League school. Let's say you're a professor.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that increase your chances of casting doubt on what the Pope's mathematician said in 1582?
I mean, logic would serve that it should, but again, if someone's already, although an historian, again, clearly, more aware of advanced technologies compared to what it used to be, still, though, if they're, again, a believer in that fashion, it still might, by all logic, still might overshadow them for whatever reason. It's like that weird conundrum where, again, sometimes you might meet somebody, they might understand everything, can't agree on like certain doubtful perspectives on certain things, but if it's something that means something to them, that they feel and believe that is the truth, they will fight and defend it, even if you can bring them all the logic again and say like, look, this is clearly not correct, but like, no, my faith has told me and I believe it's trust that this is correct.
You're talking about scientism right now, right?
Exactly, pretty much. It's weird. Very weird.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously I was being logical, but yeah, the other thing that we don't talk about enough is probably how people have tied their identity to their beliefs. They can't separate the two. There's an old saying that I read, which is really funny. So obviously everybody's familiar with that old saying, don't believe everything you hear.
Correct.
I think everybody except Maxwell might have heard of that one. But there's another one. Don't believe everything you think.
Which I've heard. I agree with that one too.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one as often. I heard it once or twice, and I really liked it because whatever you think or believe, it might be wrong. So as long as you keep that in mind, get some metacognition going on. If you haven't checked out the MindShock podcast on metacognition, make sure you check that out. You can kind of learn a lot more when you understand the possibility that you're a human and humans are fallible, and you're learning information put forth by other fallible humans, which might be fallible. It's not even that I'm saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's hard to definitively verify it one way or the other. And for whatever reason, that triggers a lot of goofs out there, but which there are no shortage of course. So let's move on here to stolenhistory.net, which is one of the best sites for examining issues with the so-called official timeline of humans. Now, the other thing that's kind of weird is, so people who do believe in corruption, why wouldn't corrupt profiteers seek to change history in a certain way in order to increase the amount of power they have? Are the coincidence theorists saying that people in positions of authority wouldn't manipulate history books to increase their own power? I mean, that's kind of silly, isn't it?
I mean, that it is. I mean, after all, then, because if not for that, then why would how those things go? History is written by the victor.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones, actually. Yeah, history is written by the victors. Napoleon had a good one, too. History is a pack of lies agreed upon.
I could work with that, too.
There's also another great one from George Orwell's 1984, of course. Actually, you know what? Would the best way to describe 2021 be simply 1984?
I could see that.
So, yeah, George Orwell's novel referring to the party, who controls the past controls the future. who controls the present controls the past. So, of course, the corrupt authorities of the establishment who control the so-called government textbooks on history and all official sources, they, of course, control the present, so they control the past, which in turn controls the future. Now, to all the coincidence theorists that say, oh, well, other countries, let's say this is going on in America, other countries wouldn't help cover it up. Well, here's the thing. First of all, there's Hanlon's razor. Never mistake for malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity. That could be another slogan for 2021. But and obviously black and white logical fallacies would dictate it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. Of course it's both. There's also corrupt people out there, but corrupt people aren't necessarily these super geniuses that are infallible either. Humans are human. So if anything, they could be more overconfident and stupid and overestimate their abilities as well. So if this is going on, I use this example. It's the same thing as for all the people that think that NASA never went to the moon. Why would other countries cover up for them? Well, first of all, if they didn't know that it was fake, there wouldn't be a cover up. Or two, if they did know it was fake, but it threatens their own power and authority, why would they expose it? Similarly, would let's say the Catholic Church, branches of the Catholic Church in different countries, would they blow the whistle on their own? How often does that happen? With all of the corruptions and criminal activities that occur within the Catholic Church, I mean, we're talking about a wild scale. We're talking about child abuse. We're talking about extortion. We're talking about all types of conspiracy and corruption that occur within the Catholic Church. Does the Catholic Church blow the whistle on their own? I'm going to drop another quote here by the great George Carlin. You don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. So if it's in the best interest of all these different countries to maintain these false historical narratives, why would they blow the whistle on other countries if it exposes that they're doing the same thing?
Okay.
For whatever reason, a lot of coincidence theorists can't grasp that. That's actually one of the most commented on, their inability to understand conflicts of interest. But so here we are on stolenhistory.net. This is the calendar conundrum. It was actually posted September 14th, 2020 by White Wave. Very interesting write-up here. The Julian calendar, proposed allegedly and instituted by Julius Caesar in 40... Actually, let me do another quick aside. Do you think everything in society would be more accurate if we simply put the word allegedly in front of every single claim ever? Just to get that through the thick skulls of the masses.
That's what every lawyer would do. So
I mean, that simple word really makes things clear, doesn't it? Or if you want it to be more accurate, alleged by the corrupt.
even allegedly credible information.
Or what about allegedly alleged by the corrupt with terrible track records of mostly failure? Would that be the most accurate way to put everything put forth in so-called the official narratives?
If you're talking about spoken by the allegedly corrupt with alleged, credible information allegedly produced in this said fashion, then yeah, sure, you put it that way.
Okay, so we have the Julian calendar, proposed allegedly and instituted by Julius Caesar, 46 BC, was a reform of the old Roman calendar based on a 10-month March through December calendar year, started at the time of the Roman Empire founder King Romulus, whenever that was. The mean calendar year equals 365 days, 5 hours, 49 minutes, and 12 seconds. Abbreviated 365.2423 days long. The reform added January and February, making a 12-month year of roughly 30 days each, and shortened the average year by 0.0075 days to stop the drift of the calendar with respect to the equinox. Official records differed from astronomical observations by 159 years. That's a pretty that's a pretty large margin of error, don't you think? The old Roman calendar, based on the old Egyptian and Etruscan methods of calculating solar days, was off by 159 years. That doesn't sound accurate. Since the mean calendar year is a known constant, the amount of drift can be determined. The amount of drift has been calculated to be 310 years for every one day the calendar deferred. What do you think of these large percent errors? I mean, these are gigantic errors if this is true.
Indeed, it is. Though, admittedly, I mean, I wonder because, like, in the sense of that, you know, history is agreed upon lies, and isn't time simply an agreed upon construct?
Oh, we're not going down that one. Well, let's save that one for our next time travel episode. If you haven't checked out the MindShock time travel series, make sure you check that out. We do have to do that third episode coming up, or second episode. I forget how many episodes we did. Okay, so let's continue here. Bede, an 8th century monk and historian, in parentheses, of questionable historicity, showed an error of greater than 3 days, which equals greater than 930 years since the institution of the Julian calendar. 930 years minus Bede's year of drift discovery, 725 AD, equals a difference of negative 205, of minus 205. So either Bede's calculations were off, or the Julian calendar was instituted in 205 BC, or someone has been playing with the dates between the Julian calendar start date of 46 BC and Bede's date calculation 725 AD. Since Bede himself is a questionable historical character, meaning he may be one of those people Fomenko talked about as being a double for someone else, we have no way of verifying his calculations or even his existence. Still, it was known from several sources besides Bede that by the 8th century, the Julian calendar did not correspond with the mean calendar. So we didn't have Newton's calculations of the planetary bodies until the 17th century. Who knows if the calculations for the mean calendar year were even correct? And this is a great question. And this is something the authority worshipping cultists never want to address. Because how can we verify any of this information?
That's a very good question, considering. I honestly, I'm not even sure. That'd be an interesting problem to solve.
I mean, that's why scientism itself is such a huge problem, because people who think they're being scientific, they're actually more religious than religious people, because at least religious people say that what they believe to be the truth is based on their faith. Whereas the people indoctrinated into the cult of authority worship, aka scientism, they pretend it's objective truth that can be verified, but they're not verifying it. They're taking the books on blind religious faith alone. Which is weird. I mean, why would all of these humans be so infallible? I mean, is it reasonable to assume that all of these historical figures and all of their calculations, that it was all correct? Is that reasonable?
Personally, to me, no.
I mean, that's, yeah, stated simply. I mean, maybe they're correct. I'm just saying, is it reasonable to just assume that they're completely infallible with all these calculations? But let's continue the post here. The Julian calendar still contained the problem of drift, and in 1200 AD, Roger Bacon, a Franciscan friar and Aristotelian philosopher, scholar, naturalist, estimated the Julian calendar to be off by 7 to 8 days. One day was 310 years of drift, so 2,170 to 2,480 years of difference. I mean, that's not a tiny amount. That is not tiny. That is not tiny at all. Such drift was seriously affecting when religious holidays, especially Easter, was celebrated. By the 16th century, 1582, a civil calendar named after Pope Gregory VIII was proposed. The Pope introduced the calendar on October 4th, 1582 AD. Since the drift amounted to 10 days difference, the Pope decided to just rip the Band-Aid off, as if it were, in one short shriek, so that October 4th, 1582 AD, was immediately followed by October 15th, 1582. It has been suggested that the adjustment should take place slowly, adding one day every 310 years, but the Pope chose a more instantaneous calendar reform. This led to riots as the simple folk cried, "Give us back our 11 days." I mean, how would you like it if somebody stole 11 days from your life?
I mean, because of it having to be looking at monitored fashion where things could be done, suggestively done, or whatever, and such, yeah, I'd probably be very thoroughly. I know people who are upset about daylight savings time. It's like,
Well, I mean, do we want to go down that rabbit hole? Because that's a big rabbit hole of nonsense. Have you heard that Florida is observing daylight savings time for the last time this past year?
really? Is that so? I
Yeah,
had
let
no
me
idea.
bring that up. Florida's not messing around. So here's an article from Miami.cbslocal.com. Florida remains in the dark about seasonal time changes. Florida voters seem to like the idea of no more wintertime dark at 5:30 with year-round daylight savings time, maybe golf or a jog after work in the daylight. But this Sunday, once again, the clock goes back as an hour of sleep is gained, blah, blah, blah. Okay. In 2018, the Florida Sunshine Protection Act was passed in Florida legislature with overwhelming support for year-round daylight savings time. But the way the law was written makes it so that the change can only happen if a federal version is passed and signed into law. Okay. 32% of Americans wanted to move daylight savings time all year around. 28% want to keep switching back and forth. So a majority of Americans are tired of switching time twice a year. Florida, okay. Florida was the first to pass the bill, went through the legislature, got signed by the governor, but it wasn't the last. Daylight savings advocates in those states hoping that legislation of the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee will go forward, though it is doubtful. So they want to enact year-round daylight savings time, so only one adjustment? Huh. So apparently it's going back and forth, so... Okay, here's a more straightforward... Wait. Yeah, so it wouldn't go back and forth. It would be only one adjustment for year-round daylight savings time.
Okay.
Florida voted against changing the clocks for the end of daylight savings time, October 30th, 2019. So this is an ongoing thing. Like, Florida really seems to be wound up about this. Okay, let's go.
Puns intended, I see.
Actually, it wasn't intended, but now that you mention it, that's a good one. That's funny. Okay. I totally forgot what we were talking about. Okay, here we go. Back to the calendar conundrum. So such drift was seriously affecting religious holidays, Easter. Okay, so yeah, give us back our 11 days. Like all change, the Gregorian calendar was slow to be adopted. Every country, principality, kingdom, and institution had their own calendars, and many were reluctant to adopt anything proposed by the Roman Catholic Church. The rural folk paid little attention to calendar days and followed the rhythms of the season for planting and harvesting. Doesn't that make more sense? Like, who cares about those corrupt people passing laws about when time should be? These rural folk are farming. They don't give a crap what other humans say. They just follow nature.
Okay, that I can definitely agree with, because
Seems a lot more. It seems a lot more accurate in any case. The Catholics had a saints calendar that kept track of the year by following how long it was between days of venerated or canonized persons. I don't know why I find that funny, but I find that kind of weird. The French, a mostly Catholic territory at the time, decided to use their own calendar in order to defy the power of the papacy and aristocracy. Faber d'Eglantine, a French actor and politician, supposedly two categories, although they're hard to differentiate from one another. That is true, is credited with what is known as the rural calendar. He was mainly the PR voice and not the brains behind its creation. On the abolition of the Gregorian calendar in France, he sat on the committee entrusted with the creation of the French Republic's French Republican calendar. The calendar was designed by the politician and agronomist Gilbert Rham, although it is usually attributed to Faber d'Eglantine, who invented the names of the months. This calendar featured a 10-day week, so that Sunday would be forgotten as a religious day, and the months were named after the intrinsic qualities of the season. He contributed a large part of the new nomenclature, for example, the months prairial and florial, as well as the days primity and duodi. That'd be cool. Months called prairial and florial.
really interesting.
He also advocated for a decimal system of counting, and for a while, it never caught on. Clocks and watches displayed both decimal and duodecimal time. Mnemonics were also invented to help people remember the new calendar counting system, but they quickly devolved into 30 days, half September, all the rest I can't remember.
That is very funny. I respect that.
The Republican calendar year began the day the autumnal equinox occurred in Paris and had 12 months of 30 days each, which were given the new names based on nature, principally having to do with the prevailing weather in and around Paris. So autumn vendemmiare, from the French vendange, derived from the Latin vendemmia, grape harvest, starting the 22nd, 23rd, or 24th September. Brumaire, from the French broom, mist, starting 22nd, 23rd, or 24th of October. Frimaire, from the French frima, frost, starting the 21st, 22nd, or 23rd of November. These make a lot more sense to me. Winter, nivose, from Latin nivosus, snowy, starting December 21st, 22nd, or 23rd. Pluviose, from the French pluvier, derived from the Latin pluvius, rainy, starting January 20th, 21st, or 22nd. Ventos, from the French vento, derived from the Latin ventosus, windy, starting February 19th, 20th, or 21st. Spring, germinal, from the French germination, starting March 20th or 21st. Floreal, from the French fleur, derived from the Latin flos, flower, starting April 20th or 21st. Prairial, from the French prairie meadow, starting May 20th or 21st. Summer, messidor, from the Latin messis, harvest, starting from June 19th or 20th. Thermidor or fervidor, from the Greek thermon, summer heat, starting July 19th or 20th. Fructidor, from the Latin fructus, fruit, starting August 18th or 19th. Those make a lot more sense to me. In Britain, a contemporary wit mocked the Republican calendar by calling the months wheezy, sneezy, and freezy.
Oh, wow.
Slippy, drippy, and nippy.
Rather funny.
Showery, flowery, and bowery. And hoppy, croppy, and poppy.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, they were funny. They were funny. The Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle suggested somewhat more serious English names in 1937 with the French Revolution, a history, namely Vintagarius, Fogarius, Frostarius, Snowius, Rainius, Windius, Boodle, Buttle, Floweral, Meadowal, Reapidor, Heatidor, and Fruitidor. Like the French, I mean, that almost sounds like some Lord of the Rings months. Like the French originals, they are neologisms suggesting a meaning related to the season. The French calendar was used from 1793 to 1805 and again for 18 days by the Paris Commune in 1871 to remove all religious and royalist influences from the calendar. In their religious spite, they made 10-day weeks instead of the current 7 to confuse churchgoers as to which day was Sunday. The Soviet calendar added 5 and 6 day work weeks between 1929 and 1940. Greece adopted the Gregorian use finally in 1923. And I'm going to interject here again with another point. If you want to confuse the masses, would these so-called authorities, would they play games with the calendars to throw people off? To throw their natural balance and sense of nature in the world off to make them better tax slaves? Any thoughts on that, Sid Irwin?
Personally, I'm just more or less intrigued to hear it. No, honestly, I'm just enjoying that.
I couldn't hear you. What'd you say?
I said, no, honestly, I'm just enjoying just hearing that background setup for it. I won't lie.
You don't have any thoughts?
No, honestly, surprisingly enough, I am a blank page or slate on this one.
You don't think it'd be confusing if all of a sudden tomorrow there were 10 days in the week and a whole bunch of different months? You don't think that would throw off people's sense of balance and just in general on how to live their life?
I mean, it would, undoubtedly, sure, of course. Some people actually might even either appreciate it just if they felt they never had enough time, but they could say, well, this is the week. I can get this now. I can do this. But at the same time, I mean, I ain't gonna lie. In all honesty, if you want to throw governments about it, everything just, again, extended, that just means more opportunity for her to say, well, there's this much more that you could and should be doing here to contribute to said society.
Well, what I was
I mean,
getting at was a little less was not quite so practical, but more in a spiritual sense to leave the population dazed and confused.
oh, I don't know. I would like it. I would like to have more time. Also, stuff like, poppy, flowery, and, preppy be interesting names just to have around.
Okay, continuing on here. Not all parts of the world were using even the Julian calendar, so you can imagine the confusion caused by international trade and communication. Not forgetting the people born on those missing 11 days caused by the Gregorian calendar reform. So they had no more birthday. Some official documents of the time register ships leaving on October 11th and arriving on October 5th. Genealogies were also not consistent with the time change, and not everyone complied with record keeping of the time. If you have a European ancestry and are investigating your ancestry, keep in mind and probably just skip over that time frame to the 11-day period before the Gregorian became official to avoid confusion. The solar Hijri, an astronomical equinox-based lunar calendar used in Iran and Afghanistan, began in 622 AD. In 1930, a world calendar was proposed to correct the deficits of the Gregorian calendar, but was rejected again. Recommendations for modifying the Julian calendar based on true motions of the sun and moon were rejected at the 1544 AD Council of Trent. Aloysius Lilius, a Calabrian astronomer, chronologist, and doctor, came up with the Gregorian calendar with a Jesuit mathematician and astronomer modified after Lilius's death into what we have now. Current consensus is that our calendar is off by thousands of years, not hundreds. He doesn't really clarify the consensus of what, based on astronomy, not necessarily based on missing years, although there's, of course, tons of different theories in the middle, especially Flamenco's chronology. The drift of 10 days at the beginning of the Gregorian calendar, 3,100 years from the time of the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. Mysteriously, the Gregorian calendar involves cycles of 400 years called doomsday rule. Wow, that's ominous. Since we didn't have a doomsday in 1982, or did we? 400 years after the initiation of the Gregorian calendar, one can only wonder as to the cryptic cycle of 400 years embodied in our current Gregorian calendrical system. Or is that somehow embedded into the calendar, the timetable of resets? We talked about that on our Mud Flood Altered History podcast. You remember that?
I do.
Is that what's hidden in the calendar? Doomsday Rule, 400-year cycles? That's a really creepy name.
That it is, but I mean, yeah, we've all heard of it. I mean, after all, people would have figured 2012 was going to be, no, year 2000 would be a doomsday year, that the year 2012 would be a doomsday year, even for some, 2020 could be a doomsday year of sorts.
Basically, wasn't there a new estimate on the Mayan calendar that was December 21st, 2021 or something like that?
I wonder, because that definitely seemed to go by in a blip.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact, and of course theirs are cycles. There's no actual end of the world, but there's just cycles, and we do appear to be in the end of a cycle, do we not? I mean, back in 2012, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, nothing's happening." A whole bunch of stuff is happening now. Okay.
Yes.
Continuing on here, basically with all the changes to our day numbering system, indecipherable calculations, stolen time, questionable historical persons contributing to all those mentioned inconsistencies, our current timeline is inscrutable and irreconcilable with available history. The best we can do, in my opinion, is to go with what we've got and realize that our history can't possibly be reconciled with the current official documents. So that's a very interesting write-up, because basically everything we're looking at are just assumptions and vague estimations. Would you agree or disagree?
Uh, you know me, I'm neither to disagree or agree, just, possibilities, because I can neither confirm nor deny through either or based on their calculations, even depending on what tools they might use. And I don't have the tools to check their information calculations, but I'll agree for now.
Well, let's talk about all of these problems here. So this is Popular Astronomy, Volume 28, 1920, regarding Peter the Great, which has some very interesting things in it, which could possibly shed some light on how things were viewed upon. This was edited. So this is Popular Astronomy, a review of astronomy and allied sciences, founded by W. W. Payne. Editors Herbert C. Wilson, Kervin H. Gingrich, Edward A. Fath. So here's an interesting excerpt also posted on Stolen History here from this. Until the time of Peter the Great, Russia, while using the Julian calendar, had not used the Christian era but had made use of the era of Constantinople, dating from the creation of the world. It was believed that the world was created on September 1st, 5509 BC, that's a very specific date, and therefore September 1st, 1699 of the Julian calendar was called in Russia the first day of the year 7208. But on December 19th and 20th of that year, decrees were issued by Peter the Great directing that the Christian era be employed and that the year beginning on January 1st instead of September 1st, the new order of things, or is that the New World Order, going into effect on the 1st of the following January, the event being marked by a celebration lasting for a week. So is that the origin of New Year's Day, the New Year's Day celebration? The Russians had come to expect big things of Peter the Great, but they were amazed to learn that even he could change the course of the sun. So we're talking about calendars being made on people who by people who believed that individuals could change the course of the sun. Would you consider that accurate, Sid Irwin?
That's extremely accurate, accurately bizarre. But yeah, I don't know. That's
Are you saying that Tsar was bizarre?
I guess I am.
Okay. But not all approved the reform, for many believed that the age of the world had been diminished by hundreds of years, and the elderly Russians who had grown old under the former system met in secret to utter their protests. Voltaire, in his Life of Peter the Great, says that some obstinate ones, persuaded that the world was created on the 1st of September, continued to begin the year at that time. The Tsar was told that God would not have created the world in winter when the ground could not be cultivated, but in autumn when the corn and all the fruits were ripe. But Peter showed them with a globe that Russia was not the whole world, and that in countries far to the south it was warm even in January, and that in the course of time the beginning of the year would be in different seasons, since the tropical year was not the same length as the calendar year. It is supposed that the chief reason for not adopting the Gregorian calendar was the fact that England still refused to accept it, and in Russia, previous to the revolution of 1917, the Julian calendar continued to be used. A dispatch from Russia published in the New York Times December 27, 1917, stated that arrangements had been made by the Bolsheviki in order to introduce the Gregorian calendar in the early part of 1918 by the omission of 13 days, the day following December 24th, 1917, to be called January 7th, 1918. Russia, by this omission, losing the intervening Christmas and New Year's Day. So they wanted to get rid of Christmas and New Year's. Does that sound like a good idea?
Hopefully, I can't see the masses going for it, but who knows? If they know how to manipulate them just right, you could tell.
The decree of Peter the Great, dated December 19th, 7208, or 1699, is entitled An Edict of His Imperial Majesty. On the writing henceforth, in all papers from the 1st of January 1700, since the birth of our Lord, but not since the creation of the world. The decree of December 20th was one long to be remembered, and an English translation of it made from the Russian by Mrs. Derman of the Library of Congress is given as follows. December 20th, 7208. Is it kind of weird to see a date written like that? 7208.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
An edict of His Imperial Majesty on the celebration of the New Year. The Grand Emperor ordered to tell. He, the Grand Emperor, is aware that not only in many European Christian countries, but amongst the Slavonian peoples also, which in everything are in conformity with our Eastern Orthodox Church, as for instance amongst the Wallachians, Moldavians, Serbs, Dalmatians. There's a people known as the Dalmatians, interesting. Bulgarians, and the very subjects of the Grand Emperor, the Cherkesses and Greeks, from which we have embraced our Orthodox religion, that all these peoples are counting in conformity their years from the birth of our Lord 8 days later, that is from the 1st of January, but not from the creation of the world, on account of the many differences in the reckoning of those years. And at present, the year 1699, since the birth of our Lord is approaching its end, on the 1st of the coming January will conjointly begin the new year of 1700 and the new century. And for the sake of that good and useful cause, the Grand Emperor has decreed to count henceforth in the government departments and in all affairs and deeds to write the 1st of this January, the year 1700, since the birth of our Lord, and as token of this good undertaking and of the new century, the royal city of Moscow, after due thanksgiving to God, and supplicant chantings in a church, and if need at one's home, by the people of distinction on the large and notable streets, thoroughfares, and at the houses of the eminent men of the clergy and the worldly rank, there should be made opposite the gates in front of the images of saints some ornaments of trees and of pine, fir, and juniper branches, like those prepared on the bazaar and on the lower drugstore, or they may be made as it is more convenient and proper for anyone according to the gates and the place, but every one of the poor people shall at least place a tree or a branch on the gate or over his house, and it ought to be ready toward the 1st of the coming of January of that year, and the ornaments must be in their places until the 7th day of January of the year 1700. Furthermore, on the 1st day of January, as a token of merriment, on the mutual greetings of the new year and of the new century, there should be done the following. As soon as on the great red square the fire amusements are kindled and a cannonade begins, the most on the notable courtyards of the boyars and the okolnichis and the councillors and the high and distinguished persons of the court, military and merchants' ranks, everyone on his courtyard should produce 3 times a cannonade from small cannons, if they are at one's disposal, and from several muskets or some other kind of small rifles, and shoot rockets, as many as one may have, and on the large streets where there is a space, from the 1st to the 7th of January, should be kindled in the nighttime fires of firewood, dry branches and straw, but where the courtyards are small, 5 or 6 courtyards should be joined in order to make such a fire, or if one would like, he should place on poles by 1, 2, or 3 resinous and worn-out barrels, and after filling them with straw or dry branches, to kindle them. And before the town hall of the burgomaster, the cannonade and the same firing and ornaments should be arranged at his discretion. Wow. Okay, so is that the origin of fireworks on the new year? No thoughts, said Erwin?
Honestly, I think so. I mean, do you have any else you might want to add to it?
I mean, that is very, very interesting. The other thing I find interesting regarding this so-called switch over was, of course, the fall of the old Russian Empire, or old Russia, and the rise of the Soviet Union itself, coincidentally coinciding with some of these switches. I mean, the amount of coincidences everywhere is just it's hard to make heads or tails. It's also hard to completely dismiss them.
You might say that was a coincidence. There is, I guess, holiday present kind of joy to know that kind of thing, to throw that theory out there.
There's another interesting post here by Dreamtime on the Stolen History Forum AM means the beginning of creation, not the beginning of our civilization. It's a Christian term. But when questioning whether there was any consensus outside of Christian groups, there are other signs of a creation date being very recent, with the Mayan calendar and Zoroastrianism fitting roughly into the time frame of a few thousand years. Zoroastrianism involves a 12,000-year cosmogony and chronology, often divided into 4 ages, as outlined in the Buddhism. The first age lasted for 3,000 years and included the spiritual creation by Ahura Mazda, followed by the physical creation of 3,000 years when evil entered the world. See Angra Mainyu. Ahura Mazda first created 7 abstract heavenly beings called Amesha Spentas, who support him and represent beneficial aspects, along with numerous Yazads, lesser beings worthy of worship. He then created the universe itself in order to ensnare evil. Ahura Mazda created the floating egg-shaped universe in 2 parts. First, the spiritual Manog, and 3,000 years later, the physical Getig. I mean, what does he do now? He just makes cars?
He very well could be. He could be in retirement right now. Just enjoying the spoils of his labor.
Ahura Mazda, I mean, Mazdas are pretty nice,
Yeah, pretty much.
especially Miatas. Do you have a Miata?
No, though I do know someone who does.
One thing that comes up often is this idea of 4 cycles. The 7 ages in Christianity could be originally based on 4 plus 4 cycles, with the 4th and 5th cycle being the lowest, most physical cycle, so counted at 1. I wonder whether one reason of the church's rewriting of history was to censor the idea of cycles and make everything appear to be a one-way road into heaven or hell. The only cosmology that speaks of a very old Earth is supposedly the Hindu one, but I have never seen direct quotes, and it appears to me the vague language made everyone go wild on the interpretations. There's an ongoing discussion of the length of the yugas, going from thousands to millions of years, so I think there's basically no direct quote in scriptures. If I remember correctly, there's several 100,000 years old based on estimates and also based on the content of stories. Because if you're gonna, obviously, if you want to make a bunch of stories about rulers and kings in one particular area, you're gonna have a lot of stories that fill hundreds of thousands of years versus, let's say, 1,000 years. There's only so many stories you can tell that would be able to be jam-packed into those years if the estimate on the months and years are correct on what the time frame is on that. If there are cycles, and if the cycles are only a couple thousand years each, and there's a reset after the completion of each cycle, then it makes sense we can't live in a world with a very long history. And in my opinion, everything looks like those cycles exist, whether it's 4,000 years or 7,000 years or 40,000 years. I think those short time frames are more likely than millions of years. The doomsday rule appears to be simply a modern calculation method and doesn't refer to cycles, but microcycles within the bigger cycles seems likely to me, especially because the last 1,000 years have seen a couple of them apparently. It seems many ancient cycle calendars agree that we are in the darkest cycle or most physical cycle, which would probably explain why we have forgotten where we are. Another problem with years is that 1 year 10,000 years ago could have meant something different than it means nowadays, depending on how many days a year had, how time was perceived, and whether there were different seasons or day and night. I agree that 2018 makes everything before the year 0 as almost non-existent. I also think it's ridiculous for entire civilizations to base a calendar on the supposed birth date of a single man who could only have operated locally in a very constricted area. It doesn't really make sense, except if the church needed some reason to create a new concept of the past. It's also interesting to ask when the AD idea really began. Certainly not during the lifetime of Jesus. So the first guy to talk about time in terms of AD was Dionysius Exiguus in 500 AD. Unfortunately, here's a quote here. However, nowhere in his exposition of his table does Dionysius relate his epoch to any other dating system, whether consulate, Olympiad, year of the world, or regnal year of Augustus. Much less does he explain or justify the underlying date. It wasn't until 800 AD that people started to rely on this dating format, and I think with the new chronology in mind, there's reason to believe in reality it wasn't the end of the Middle Ages that people really relied on it. It wasn't until the end of the Middle Ages that people really relied on it. The process started in Central Europe, and it took until 1700 until Russia followed, just a couple decades after Russia became part of the Invisible Empire, annihilating the Tartar civilization. What if Jesus appeared 500 years before the switch into the last age, the Kali Yuga, and told people of the nearing end of the era, but it was misinterpreted to mean the end of the world? If Jesus lived ca 1100 AD, then the end of the last era would be around 1500 to 1600, which is surprisingly the time when the dubious and opaque Middle Ages ended, and many maps show cataclysmic changes. I think it's also possible that Jesus in reality represented a broad movement of people keeping some ancient knowledge about the cycles and our position in them, but he was singled out. Zoroastrianism and the dating of the world. The tradition of the coming saviors, thus triplicated, is set in a framework of cosmic history whereby limited time was identified with a world year divided into periods of 1,000 years each. It is generally held that the concept of the world year is attributed to Babylonian speculation concerning recurrent great years repeating themselves monotonously throughout time. In considering this development of the legend, one enters therefore into the historical period of the faith after it had been adopted in Western Iran. The Zoroastrian texts vary as to how many millennia make up the world year. Some give the figure as 9, 3 times being 3 times 3 being a favored Zoroastrian number, others as 12, corresponding to the 12 months of the natural year and the 12 signs of the zodiac. There are, however, grounds for thinking that the original figure was rather 6,000 years, as a figure which was increased to 9,000 or 12,000 as scholastics elaborated the scheme. Certainly, it is only within the last 6,000 years that any events are represented as taking place upon this earth.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it goes on to a lot more of the different traditions and all of the ages. I mean, it's quite curious here. It also makes parallels to metals. So gold is the reign of King Vistasp. Silver is the reign of Ardashir the K, who is called Vahman, son of Spetodad. Copper is the reign of Valak, the Arasid king, who will remove from the world existing heresies. Brass is the reign of Ardashir the Sazanian and his son King Shabur and Aburbad of the true religion. Lead is the reign of King Vaharm Gor, who will make apparent the spirit of joy. Steel is the reign of King Korsra, son of Kavad. Iron is the vile rule of devs with disheveled hair, of the seed of wrath. Spidaman Zardust at the end of your millennium. In the summary version of the prophecy preserved in the Dinkard, the authority of the lost Avest on Sungar and ask 52, there are only 4 times of gold, silver, steel, and iron. It seems that the tradition of 4 ages of metal, which marked the progressive decline of humanity, which was current in antiquity, and that its origin is very old. I mean, that's also curious because then you have the Gold Age, the Iron Age, and Stone Age, Bronze Age.
Right.
All right, hold on. That corresponds to the ages of man: Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Heroic Age, and the Iron Age. So some interesting parallels to Zoroastrianism, and then also Hinduism has very similar time frames as well. Huh. Very, very curious. So a lot of issues here. And then, of course, we have the Mayan calendar, the wheels of time, and Mayan calendars being a lot more accurate. There's one adjustment, every 50 some years, as opposed to our current calendar, very inaccurate. So, a lot of issues with dating. And now today, people simply, I guess, brainlessly celebrate the New Year. Do you celebrate the New Year?
I sleep.
That's how you celebrate?
Yes, I think there's no better way to do the celebrate the New Year than to wake up fresh after a good rest.
Do you believe that this New Year's conspiracy is some kind of intended deception to hide the true history of humanity and keep the corrupt in power, so to speak? Or is it part of some broader spiritual conspiracy to keep humans constantly off balance to make them easier to exploit as debt slaves?
I mean, from the way you put it, I mean, is there much difference? I mean,
I don't know. There's a lot of questions here, questions that people don't ask, but this is Mind Shock, so we ask those types of questions.
well, let me ask this question then. In relation to, again, with conspiracies, I mean, in general, that would mean almost every one of them is to say that there's something that's going on, let's say, a distraction to prevent the larger picture, right? And if that's the case, then I guess if you have people celebrating New Year's, make that a big thing, then yeah, maybe there is something going on behind the scenes that's a larger picture. Something to keep the masses happy and to have them observing the one hand while you do everything else with the other. So there could very well could be something happening.
Kind of like the two hands on the face of a clock.
Indeed.
Well, there you have it. We dug deep into the conspiracy and history of New Year's. So if you do celebrate, maybe think about what you're celebrating or what you're not celebrating and why or why not. Important questions to ask with logic and reason at the forefront, as always, on MindShock. If you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal, help support MindShock, help us get more mind-shocking content out there. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.
And Sid Irwin.
Catch you guys next time in a new year, maybe, if it is a new year, or is it still the old year, or is it any year at all?
Oh boy.